donut holes, black holes, potholes. There are all kinds of holes and different people that like different kinds. For Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they get their kicks out of loopholes. Welcome to Courage and the Constitution. I'm just a guy digging behind the headlines to get to the nuggets of truth. I'm tired of the rhetoric and the propaganda. I'm being lied to by the media. I just want to know what's going on in the world. So let's do this. The more I think about it, it really is the Second Amendment that gives teeth to the rest of the Constitution, as I've heard it said. To have the means to keep the power with the people to deter the overreach of a tyrannical government, including one of which seeks to chip away, weaken, then abolish the Constitution itself, is what can preserve us as a nation. Now, gun owners, almost as a whole, they're not violent. There are hundreds of millions of guns in this country in the hands of an unknown millions upon millions of Americans, including 5 million first-time gun owners just this year. We do not see hundreds of millions of gun crimes, and certainly not by legal responsible gun owners. To cripple the industry, disenfranchise owners, punish especially low-income Americans, to add injustice to communities of color, demand the infringement of taxes on what is already owned, demand a registry for the government, to know every single gun owner and who owns what. None of this adds a shred of safety to the country, except safety to the government taking big step after big step, each one tightening of the noose around the throat of the constitutionally protected right of gun owners. Most of those who would give their life to protect both the people they love as well as absolute strangers. But that is what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are promising to do. And how do we know it? Is that's what they want to do? Because that is exactly what they tell us themselves, both in writing, through their own treacherous lips. I say treacherous because when you stand against the Constitution, that's treachery. And by the people they appoint who, by their own history and their own words, they make no qualms about their goal to disarm Americans. If you've been with me these last several videos, I've been breaking down Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's Second Amendment infringement plan. Picking up from where we left off with the last video, let's go ahead and just take a look at the next paragraph in his plan. And it's as follows. Keep guns out of dangerous hands. The federal background check system, the National Instant Background Check system, is one of the best tools we have to prevent gun violence. But it's only effective when it's used. Biden will enact universal background check legislation and close other loopholes that allow people who should be prohibited from purchasing firearms from making these purchases. Specifically, he will. Then he goes down to break it into different points from there. Now, in the last couple videos about the Biden-Harris gun plan, I expressed the facts around background checks. Is a background check at a gun store through the FBI's NICS system a good move? Sure, I think so. Now remember, they're an instant background check. The way it would typically work is that someone fills out a certain form, the worker then hops in front of a computer and plugs the person's info into the NICS system, and almost instantly a response comes back to whether the individual purchasing the firearm is clean, potentially questionable, for example, sharing a name with a known criminal in the system, or someone unlawfully unallowed to own a gun. Now, if it stopped there, okay, then fine. But it does not stop there. Biden wants more. He wants a lot more. And with Kamala as potential VP, they'll want it all. Now remember, in a previous video, I said that their aim is for the moon on this one. In the last paragraph we saw, Biden mentioned closing other loopholes. Now, 2 videos back, I discussed what the so-called gun show loophole was, and why it's really no loophole at all. Now let's look to see what else the party of staunch defense of the Constitution is up to. Require background checks for all gun sales. Today, an estimated 1 in 5 firearms are sold or transferred without a background check. Biden will enact universal background checks for all gun sales within very limited exceptions, such as gifts between close family members. This will close the so-called gun show and online sales loophole that the Obama-Biden administration narrowed, but which cannot be fully closed by executive action alone. Okay, Now, I'm not going to spend much time on this one because I addressed the concept pretty well in previous videos in this series. I addressed loopholes and how the loophole is actually a part of the law. But since Biden watered and fertilized and just gave lots of sunshine and love to his claim of the gun show loophole, according to the last section that we just saw, it grew big and strong, and now it's called the gun show and online sales loophole. You know, it's funny. When we looked at his wanting to crack down on the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, in which he proclaimed the law protects gun manufacturers from being held civilly liable for their products, Joe Biden, he deliberately lied and omitted that what the act actually protects people from is not faulty tools that causes injury, but rather from lawsuit if someone uses a gun from that manufacturer in a violent crime. But when it comes to mentioning of a loophole, the name grows. But then again, as we saw of both Biden and Harris, their credibility is as shallow as their integrity, and they have no problem lying and pandering. Just go ahead and watch their debates to get just what they want. Now, what you'll see is that these politicians are so advantageous with their wording to deceive others and gain their desires. As we look at the next few bullet points of the ways in which Biden is claiming he will address the issue above, you'll see that their love for the term loophole is endearing to them. But why? Why do they love that term? Well, as we saw with the gun show loophole, it's no loophole at all. But it is actually called the private sales exemption. It is legal and it is right. And this so-called loophole is no big player in violent crime, where, as I also showed you, studies show that those who used guns in violent crimes, for the great majority of them, they were guns either stolen or purchased on the black market, in which most of those guns are stolen. So closing the claimed loophole will not do a thing to change that. But let's go on and just discover the love affair Biden has with loopholes. You know, perhaps if he got lonely, one of those loopholes could, never mind. Let's just go ahead and look at the first section of his loophole orgy. Close other loopholes in the federal background check system. In addition to closing the boyfriend loophole, highlighted below, Biden will. Of course, he carries on with his other sections. So, the boyfriend loophole. They quickly mentioned that, and then they moved right past. Let's not do that ourselves. Let's take a look at this here boyfriend loophole. Now, I wonder how many people, other than guilted female lovers, have ever even heard of a boyfriend loophole. Let's look at what the boyfriend loophole is and whether or not it, like the gun show loophole, is actually a loophole at all. Now, the claim for closing the loophole, actually called the Lattenberg Amendment, is a perceived flaw in the law around the misdemeanor of domestic violence. Now, as the law stands currently, certain people convicted cannot legally own a gun under federal law. What the Lattenberg Amendment did was amend the Gun Control Act of '68, which barred people convicted of a felony domestic violence offense from legally owning a firearm. Now, notice I said a felony domestic violence. Felony domestic violence would be such as physical assault that leaves marks on the body. Now, these kinds of assaults are what would classically bar the offender from owning a firearm, mostly because of the assumption that the individual is unstable enough and can lose control in a heated situation, which puts others at risk. Now, the misdemeanor domestic violence can be anything from a slap to somebody who, let's see, what's a good example? Somebody who angrily just throws a plate at a wall, and a part of the plate ricochets off and actually strikes the other person. Now, clearly, that was not a direct attack at or against the individual, but the law considers it reckless domestic violence, and it lists it as a misdemeanor. Now, for those who wish to cast the first stone and point judgmental fingers, have you ever gotten so mad that you've thrown or punched something, even if it was a pillow or a mattress on a bed? How about a wall? Yeah, that could land you a misdemeanor domestic violence charge. That can also strip someone of the right to own a gun. Now, this is the problem with the law, that it can be so constrictive at times that the punishment does not fit the crime. Imagine, you lost your job. You've been locked down because of the government orders around coronavirus. Your children are not going into school and they're just going crazy. You just got to notice that the house is being foreclosed on because you have no income to pay. Then your spouse or partner accuses you of something that you did not do because he or she is just under a load of stress as well. And in a fit of anger from just so much piling up, you take and you have to throw a plate at the wall, a piece ricochets off and hits your spouse, causing the slightest cut, but a cut nonetheless. One of the kids screams from the surprise of the plate breaking, and 20 minutes later the police show up at your door because a neighbor called. They see the plate and the cut on your spouse, and whammo! Slapped with a misdemeanor charge, and the judge orders you to be stripped of your Second Amendment rights. Well, the Lattenberg Amendment was put into place to create a small barrier of protection against an often unjust law that results in unjust punishment. Oh, and that loss of the right to own a gun is for a lifetime. Imagine that. So the boyfriend loophole gives some leniency to someone who is in a relationship with a person but does not live with that person and has no child with that person. Now, and I want to make this very, very clear. It does not excuse them from a conviction of real domestic violence if that occurs, however. But those little misdemeanor incidences will sometimes, and I stress, sometimes, it's not like it happens all the time, will not result in the individual being stripped of their right to bear arms. The people who want to close that so-called loophole, remember, are those who want guns out of the hands anyway. So they will find any way that they can to just chip away at the Second Amendment in whatever angle they can find. I've mentioned before the low-hanging fruit, taking those easy little things to chip away at first while they're breaking down the entire Second Amendment to get to the heart of what it is. Now, do you know why an amendment like this was put into place? Checks and balances. Just like if the Democrats take the presidency, legislature, and the Senate, then they would do anything that they want with all their power, crushing Republicans underfoot and taking siege of the nation. And not just Republicans, independents, Green Party, other parties as well. Now, not everything that they do is awful, of course, but this is not the same Democrat Party of the past. These people are far more left, and they are far more dangerous to the Democratic Republic. But I digress. The idea is that there is still a limit to the power over people. Hence the Lattenberg Amendment. Now, people who support closing the loophole say it's because it empowers abusers and makes them more dangerous by allowing them to own a firearm. But remember, they do not go on to explain in full what they really mean by abuser. When most of us hear that word abuser, we imagine the worst. But many, such as Everytown and Moms Demand Action and other staunch anti-self-protection groups, consider cussing at somebody an act of abuse deemed worthy of stripping somebody of their firearm ownership. They just want firearms gone. They don't really care how. Even if it's unjust. To them, the ends justifies the means. Now, I don't know anyone who advocates for domestic violence. I certainly do not. But remember, we are dealing with the letter of the law here, and the intent of those trying to push this law to close this loophole. Now consider this a violent offense by those seeking to abolish the Lattenberg Amendment is, by them, legitimately something such as sending a tweet to someone that causes them emotional stress. There is a reason these safeguards are put into place, but not if Biden and Harris get their way. Their plan is to strip firearm ownership. They wish to strangle it. Remember that. Well, that's enough of that. Let's just go ahead and move on. Now, there are 4 more points to this particular part of Biden's plan, and for the sake of time, I'll address those in the next video. After those, the video to follow will have some juicy bits to it, and for anyone in the gun community, prepare for your blood to boil. So, what do you think about Biden's plan so far? Is it really common sense, or is it way too much control in an area the government needs not be infringing on? Are you okay with giving up your firearms, or others having to give up theirs? Let me know in the comments below. And if you find this content of value and you believe others would benefit from it, please like, subscribe, and share. Really, it would do a lot to help us all out.